Welcome to Korean True Crime, with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Today's episode covers the sudden disappearance of a veterinary graduate student, following a series of suspicious events that spiraled the investigation into an unsolvable disaster. As you may come to expect from my show, we are going to go through the frustration of the mistakes and poor police work that turned this mystery into a cold case. Thank you so much to Vix Mac, Lala, J. Colomo, and Ben Jones for their support on Patreon. My patrons are genuinely the kindest folk. Thank you for voting on today's episode topic. I was really excited to deep dive into this chaotic case. If you would like to join my patrons, you'll receive ad-free early access episodes, weekly Korean true crime vocabulary hinting at the content of the next episode, exclusive access to vote on future episode topics, and occasional bonus content. There are no set tiers, so all patrons gain access to everything. If you'd like to just support me with your love, find me on most social media sites at Korean True Crime. Video podcasts are available a week later on YouTube, and show notes are available for free on Patreon. Today's episode contains very vague discussion of sexual harassment and stalking. Viewer discretion is advised. Most names in today's episode are pseudonyms, except for the victim's name, Yoon-hee. What was that? If you were to go missing, how long do you think it would take before someone noticed? I've thought about this a lot in the last few weeks in researching this case. For Yoon-hee, it only took 2 days. 2 days doesn't seem like much time. When I was a kid, we had to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report, but thankfully that's changed. We know now that those first 24 hours are crucial to finding the vulnerable person that was the victim of kidnapping or even murder. For Yoon-hee, she was a punctual student, and that strict adherence to her schedule made it even more obvious when she didn't show up for class that something was wrong. Yoon-hee was a 28-year-old graduate student at Chungbuk National University's veterinary medicine program. She had actually just completed her semester. She only had one more before graduating and becoming a veterinarian. It had always been her dream, and she adored animals of all kinds. She even had 2 dogs of her own in her small apartment. She was well liked amongst her peers and professors, and was known as a very bright student. To celebrate the end of the semester, her College of Veterinary Medicine had dinner and drinks at a restaurant on Monday, June 5th, 2006. Around 40 students and a handful of professors attended the party. Yoon-hee and her friends sat together eating dinner, having drinks well into the late hours of the night. She was wearing a new dress with flowers on it that her friend, Kim-jun, had gifted her. After she had mentioned she liked it on a shopping trip, he remembered those things. They were known to be flirtatious together, but her other friends really disliked him. Jun had a very odd relationship with Yoon-hee. They'd known each other for a few years when they met in their undergraduate programs. He'd even followed her to Chungbuk National University to also attend the veterinary program. They had very similar interests and were very close friends, but he acted incredibly strange, with absolute disregard for other people noticing his strange behavior. People had seen him collecting Yoon-hee's hair that had fallen onto her desk when she left, as well as keeping a detailed observation log of her actions each day. Most people would consider this to be stalker-like behavior. It's unclear whether Yoon-hee knew that his behavior was like this or not, but when he wasn't there, she would curse about him to her friends and call him a pervert. She saw some reason to keep him around. The two of them actually went on dates and even briefly entered a relationship before returning to being friends. Like the dress she was wearing that evening, he bought her gifts a lot, so perhaps their relationship was complicated. He even was her emergency contact for school, before her parents or her sister. But back to the dinner party. As the night went on, a professor of hers came to sit beside her at the table. Yoon-hee leaned over to Jun and asked him to switch seats with her secretly. She pretended to get up to go to the washroom. He moved to the seat next to Professor Moon. Nothing odd happened from this, but her friend Minji knew that she had had an uncomfortable encounter with Professor Moon prior to this evening. Yoon-hee had told her friend Minji that he was sexually suggestive to her, and since Since then, she'd avoided him subtly. Yoon-hee actually knew this professor really well. She had tutored his young child and had dinner with his wife. She often visited him for help even when he wasn't her instructor. But that all stopped after he made her uncomfortable. The horrible situation he put her in. She hadn't told his family or reported him, most likely due to the large pressure of knowing his family and him being her school advisor overseeing her graduate program. Needless to say, she didn't have the best romantic interest in her life. This case begins like a dinner party mystery, but the mystery is only just unraveling, I promise you that. At the end of the party, Yoon-hee leaves with June to walk home. She lived less than 15 minutes away from the bar and didn't have a car, so June walked with her home. He even carried her purse for her. When they got to the studio apartment building, they talked for some time before he said goodbye to her and left at around 2:30 a.m., according to June. She didn't contact anyone else the rest of that day because she did get home in the early morning of Tuesday, June 6, 2006, which was a national holiday. It's Korean Memorial Day. On national holidays in Korea, much like other countries, schools and businesses often are closed for rest. These holidays are often called red days. Yoon-hee didn't have any plans with her friends, so nobody heard from her that day. I probably also wouldn't think anything if a friend of mine didn't respond for a day on a holiday. It wasn't until the next day, the second day, Wednesday, June 7th, 2006, that her friend and classmate Min-ji, who was with her at the party, noticed she wasn't responding. Min-ji had sent her several messages over an SMS texting app that she had on her computer. When Yoon-hee hadn't showed up for their class that day, which was extremely unusual, she knew something was wrong. I mentioned that she was very punctual, and everyone kind of knew that about her. She even carried a planner with her absolutely everywhere. When Min-ji couldn't reach her by phone because the week prior her phone had been stolen by a purse snatcher, she sent her some messages but didn't get a response. They usually went out for lunch together with their other classmates, so Min-ji headed to Yoon-hee's apartment and knocked on the door to see how her friend was. There wasn't any response, but she could hear Yoon-hee's 2 dogs sniffing at the door and barking. Yoon-hee's dogs were always kept in a separate laundry room that she had turned into a dog area. So if the dogs were out, she wondered, was she in the apartment and just not answering her door? That's strange, but maybe she was sick or she really didn't want to talk. Min-ji wasn't getting any response, so she left and chalked it up to her friend skipping class. Maybe she just wanted to prepare for the end of the year test. It wasn't unusual for students to skip class right before tests so they could study. But on the third day of Yoon-hee's disappearance, Thursday, June 8th, 2006, nobody even knew she had disappeared yet. But when she was absent again from class, Min-ji talked to June and 2 of their other mutual friends to go visit her at lunch. Min-ji had a really bad feeling about when she visited the day before. The friends walked to the studio apartment and knocked on the door again. This time, the dogs were scratching at the door and barking very loudly. They headed outside to see if they could see the window, and the windows were open, so Min-ji ran across the street to the next building's roof to try to see in the window. She saw the 2 dogs running around the apartment freely, with the room in a huge mess. The disarray that she saw was enough for her to worry and call the police. It was just way too far out of Yoon-hee's character to ignore. They all waited for the police to arrive before detailing to the officer how worried they were about Yoon-hee. The officer that arrived was very reluctant to help them, not sure why. He even tried to convince them that Yoon-hee was a young woman and could have gone on a trip without telling them. They were able to convince the officer to at least let them into the apartment so they could check on the dogs. The officer contacted the landlord and they were able to unlock the door for the friends. The sight of the apartment was disgusting. The 2 dogs had been left alone to freely roam the apartment. They weren't sure how long Yoon-hee had been gone, if it was Tuesday early morning when she got home from the party, or if she had left the day before, Wednesday. But the dogs had definitely been out since Min-ji visited the day before at lunch. The dogs had been able to use the apartment as a bathroom, so that mess was all over the place. And the dogs had taken all of her shoes and played with them in the middle of the apartment. In Korea, shoes are usually in a lowered area in front of the main door so that it keeps the dirt and germs from entering your home, especially since Korean people sit and sleep on the floor a lot because of the heated floors. Within the mess of the apartment, the friends saw a bouquet of flowers on the kitchen floor that was just in a mess because of the dogs. It looked new enough to have been from the previous weekend. There wasn't any note or information on the dried flowers, but here's the biggest mistake the officer made. The apartment's in disarray, the friends are saying she's missing, and her dogs have potentially been left alone for 2 days. Which, Yoon-hee's a vet student. She would never neglect her pets like this. Everything is suspicious about this. June is with them and says she even got home safely from the party, but we know that we can't be sure about his statement. Regardless, the officer tells the friends to contact the family, check in on her, and to take care of the pets, and he leaves them with the apartment unlocked. Minji and the other friends, including June, are left with the apartment, unsupervised. The officer tells them that they can report her missing at the station if they can't get a hold of her. A woman has been missing for possibly 2 days, and these friends are telling him that she's missing, and he still is trying to convince the friends that she just simply went on a walk and took a trip and maybe just neglected her dogs. Minji knows Yoon-hee's family well enough that she calls their house in Namyangju and gets a hold of Yoon-hee's mother. She asks the mom if Yoon-hee had gone to visit them or told them about going somewhere. Yoon-hee's mom confirms no, she hadn't gone to visit, and she hadn't even talked to them since her phone was stolen. The officer also spoke to the parents and told them to come take care of the apartment and the dogs. There was just a general lack of concern for Yoon-hee's well-being from the officer, and that was that. The officer didn't make any effort to preserve evidence of the apartment. He left without filing any reports. He didn't take any photographs. He just left. The friends wanted to be nice and cleaned up after the dogs a little bit, took care of the dogs, but mostly left everything where it was. They decided to hold the dogs until the mother and father could come the next day. If we believe the friends, including June, they didn't take anything out of the apartment. They just didn't want Yoon-hee to feel embarrassed when her family came to the apartment. The next day, Friday, June 9th, 2006, Yoon-hee's been missing possibly since Tuesday morning, so we're reaching the 72-hour mark at this point. June and Minji went to the police department to file the official missing persons report and to tell the officers they did clean the apartment and take care of the dogs. Without preservation of the apartment and the unsupervised cleaning and access to the crime scene, there's absolutely no chance fingerprints or DNA were going to be found in that apartment now. But the police officers at the station did take the missing persons report seriously. They filed it at the station, and officers went to the apartment to collect evidence, like her computer, journals, anything they could find. They also began searching the surrounding areas, including the mountain, with search dogs. Officially, the investigation had started. If you're like me and sometimes listen to things that aren't true crime, because sometimes we just need a break and want to listen to something upbeat, I recommend This Is How We Met, an Asian podcast about love. This show is filled with complex stories about first love from real people. We've been listening to many stories, from a painful conversation where a son was forced to choose between his family or his love, or how a couple survived a 5-year long-distance relationship. I don't often talk about myself on this podcast, but my husband and I are coming up on 9 years together, and we actually spent a good year long distance. Listening to this episode touched me. These stories are raw, humorous, and challenging. Listen to this snippet of the 5-year long distance relationship so you understand what I mean.
2016 sucked.
2016 was sweet. It was like the highs of a new relationship.
It was difficult being away from that partner.
2017 was challenging.
2017, a lot of family troubles, so it sucked again.
We had to be there for each other in different ways.
2018 was quite exciting when flew over to Perth to visit.
2018 was empowering. Finally had enough adult money to visit Australia whenever I wanted.
2019 was quite painful.
2019 was fun. I got to visit Australia twice, and each time we would visit like places of interest.
Painful because I had to stay back an additional year.
2020 was difficult. COVID removed the end date from our long distance relationship.
2020 was exciting because there was something to look forward to at the end of the year.
If you'd like to listen to more of This Is How We Met, find the link in the description of this episode. Now, back to today's episode. The first thing they did was search her computer for maybe traveling websites or her purchasing tickets somewhere. They also did look into her missing phone, which had been stolen 4 days prior to her disappearance on Friday, June 2nd. The phone search, however, was put on hold because all of the hits on the phone were in Seoul, which is north of where this is happening in Jeonju. The phone was stolen. They figured that the person using it was either the thief or the thief had resold it. The evidence, however, that they were focusing on, and is the most compelling, was on her computer. I also believe that this is the best evidence that they found to help find out what happened to her. On the morning of Tuesday, June 6th, the early morning when she got home from the party, Yoon-hee's computer was turned on at 2:59 a.m., about a half hour after June said they got to her apartment and said goodbye. The computer wasn't on very long, but the browser history hadn't been deleted. She had accessed the Korean online portal Naver to search for variations of sexual harassment, how to make a report to 112, which is the Korean police phone number, and vague phrases like, "A man groped my butt," "A man is following me." The assumption here is that she was searching for a way to report an incident since she was not able to make any calls due to her phone being stolen. Nobody at the party had noticed anything unusual, and she had seemed to leave with June willingly. June also continued to testify that he had not come up to the apartment at all that evening. He said goodbye and left. Her neighbors were awake during that time, but they hadn't heard anything strange at all. The searches that she made were all made in the span of 3 minutes, and her computer had nothing else from 3:02 a.m. despite staying on until it was shut down at 4:21 a.m. Now, this isn't because the computer wasn't used. Oddly, the rest of the time the computer on wasn't just the computer on. The history was actually manually deleted by someone who knew the computer well enough to delete the data from the computer itself, not just the browser. They didn't need to be a hacker of any sorts, but certainly they had to know the computer well enough to manage it. It's 2006. Computers are a little inaccessible to a lot of people. The information itself wasn't able to be recovered, but the police were able to discover that the data was deleted from NateOn, a messaging service similar to Skype, Zoom, or KakaoTalk, where you can message people or video call them. It's possible that Yoon-hee had deleted her history from the computer to keep her privacy about the incident that had happened or her plans of leaving town, but the police suspected that the person who deleted the history was not Yoon-hee because Yoon-hee would have known that the information from her sexual harassment searches were still on her browser. Whoever deleted the data only deleted chat logs from NateOn. Potentially, the person didn't know that Yoon-hee had searched for something on the browser earlier. Ultimately, we can't rule out that Yoon-hee wasn't the one that deleted the chat or call logs. She could have been covering her tracks to run away, maybe to avoid whoever was harassing her, or to create a Gone Girl-style mystery to prevent people from finding her by leaving fake search history. That's very unlikely. The police also took Yoon-hee's school bag, something that she probably would have brought with her if she was running away. Her purse had been stolen with her wallet and ID, so her school bag contained most of her personal items. Her planner had also been missing from the bag, which they'd been told she always had with her. More strange than that, her bag contained several sealed syringes and a full vial of anesthetic used on animals. Items like these had to be checked out from the school and brought to the labs and then returned after the lab. But the school admitted they weren't very strict about the students having them for multiple days. It was appropriate for her to have these, but it was just odd for her to bring them to her house and not just return them to the lab. Her fellow students and professor at the lab were not alarmed by this, but the police still kept it as evidence. The police weren't able to find much in terms of evidence, and even the evidence they found was just complicating the narrative even more. But it was what they didn't find that was confusing. When Minji and June and the other friends entered the apartment, they noticed that her coffee table was missing. The apartment was really small. It's a studio apartment, so her wooden-topped, metal-legged coffee table that she used for absolutely everything, a dining table, study desk, you name it, it was pretty obvious. Actually, her friends knew that the table was her prized piece of furniture. She took care of it really well, she cleaned it all the time, and polished the wood. Another friend of Yoon-hee's came forward to the police to testify about meeting with her the morning of June 5th. That's the day before her disappearance. This was a male friend of hers that we can call Sabin. Sabin was invited by Yoon-hee up to the apartment while they were walking to the university's campus together. She needed to grab her school bag on the way, but she also asked him to do her a favor. So when he went up to the studio with her, Yoon-hee asked Sobin to help her with the coffee table. One of the legs was loose and she said that it was just too hard for her to tighten. So she gave him the toolbox and asked him to secure the table's leg. He remembered he had to clean off a coffee mug and some other papers before flipping the table to fix the wobbling leg. They talked for a while and then left to head towards her class. He didn't attend the party or see her after that. But this statement was alarming to Yoon-hee's parents. This table wasn't in the apartment when they arrived. Minji and the other friends also confirmed that the table was not in the apartment when the door was first unlocked. Yoon-hee's parents were finally let into the apartment after the police finished collecting evidence, albeit too late to collect evidence, on Tuesday, June 13th. This was now 6 days since Yoon-hee was missing. The search of the mountains was still ongoing. Flyers were being distributed. News stations were talking about her. Everyone knew Yoon-hee's face for a short while. Yoon-hee's father, mother, and sister all came to the apartment to check out what had happened. Her sister was very close with her and was able to notice really quickly that some of her clothing was missing, but she wasn't sure if it was a singular outfit or more, as well as the pair of shoes that she wore almost every day. Her family believed that she wasn't taken from the apartment most likely because she didn't lock up the dogs. She had put on her shoes, changed her clothes from the dress she was wearing that evening. It was most likely to them that she had gone downstairs to meet someone briefly or gone outside to visit a nearby convenience store or go for a walk or something short. If Yoon-hee had thought she was going to be gone for longer, she would have put the dogs in their room. So this is when the family also noticed the missing table. Her father searched the entire area around the apartment for it and even searched small gaps between the apartment buildings too. His dedication to the minor details around the building led to him discovering the coffee table. It had been thrown between the narrow gap between the apartment buildings and this small forested hill behind the apartment. People often discarded furniture and trash there because it was only collected every once in a while by the larger garbage trucks. So this pile wasn't collected very often. It hadn't been collected since she disappeared, apparently. But the table wasn't intact. It was only the wooden board portion of the table. The legs had been removed carefully. There were absolutely no scratches on the actual table. The screws had been taken out properly and the metal legs were missing. There are a lot of theories about this table. The first is that June, the stalker, occasional boyfriend, friend, had found out about Yoon-hee asking Sobin to help, inviting him inside the apartment to fix her table. Perhaps he felt envious by her talking to another man, and this table was a symbol of her betraying him, if he discovered this at all. He had been keeping track of her every move, if you recall. Removing the legs on the table that Sobin fixed was a way for him to symbolically sever their relationship. Criminal psychologists who worked on this case presented this theory to the officers. Another idea that was proposed by the same psychologist was that this could have been done by Sobin himself, who, after potentially making a move on Yoon-hee, was rejected. Fixing the table was a kindness that he had done to her, and removing the legs he had just fixed was a way to get revenge on her not returning his feelings. These theories are also tied in with the bouquet of flowers thrown on the ground. They couldn't find who had sent the flowers. Perhaps the table was just thrown away by Yoon-hee later that day. Maybe Sobin didn't fix the legs very well and it ended up wobbling again. She needed a new one. The legs also could have been removed by someone wanting to cash in on recycling the iron. This was all only further complicating the investigation. They were deep in the labyrinth now. Back inside the apartment, Yoon-hee's sister carefully went through everything. She eventually noticed one small detail overlooked by the police. On the balcony, there was a used cigarette. Yoon-hee hadn't smoked in years and only did it when she was extremely stressed. She always told her sister everything, or so her sister thought. She hadn't known about someone harassing her sister. Her sister wanted to protect Yoon-hee's character and didn't want the parents to see that she was smoking again. This entire situation would already be so embarrassing for Yoon-hee when they eventually found her and she came home. So she threw the cigarette butt in the trash outside, a mistake costing them DNA evidence that could have been on it. Did Yoon-hee smoke because of the stress of what had happened to her, or for her plans to run away? Or was it a friend who had visited, the kidnapper, the murderer? Was it June's? Was it Sobin's? We'll never know. It's worth noting that the police didn't find any cigarette packs, butts, or lighters in Yoon-hee's belongings. But how did the police miss the cigarette butt on the balcony? That would be pretty obvious DNA evidence. These mistakes made it impossible for them to find any definitive proof of anyone being in her apartment that night. It was this same day, too, that the police were able to track Yoon-hee's phone to Seoul. One of her social media accounts had been accessed in Seoul as well, from a large hotel. Whoever accessed her social media account knew her login information, which if you had a cell phone in 2006, they didn't really have great internet access to websites. Regardless, the site was accessed from a computer in the hotel. How did they know her login information? Did she have it written somewhere in her purse? It'd be quite unusual. Or was it Yoon-hee herself? The police in Seoul checked the hotel's CCTV but couldn't find any evidence of Yoon-hee or someone Yoon-hee was associated with at the hotel. They didn't know who stole her phone yet, so they didn't know who to look for. The story of her phone is that it had been stolen on June 2nd, 4 days prior to her disappearance, by a person on a motorcycle who drove past, grabbed her purse string, and sped away. The story of this purse snatching was actually logged on her Naver blog the next day at 2:49 a.m. She liked to stay up late, like many Koreans do. On her blog, she wrote that the person grabbed her purse. 2 men were smoking outside of a restaurant and they saw this happen. They quickly jumped in their van to chase the thief. The driver called for her to get in the car and she did. She got in the passenger seat. They followed the motorcyclist for a few blocks until they turned down an alley that was too narrow for the van. She wrote that the men who helped her were extremely kind and she wanted to thank them, but she regretted not getting their phone numbers to thank them again. The police followed up on the missing phone because of the suspicious access of the social media accounts and the phone being pinged in Seoul. Nothing was posted or changed from her account that they had noticed. Using the street CCTV, they were able to go back and find the owner of the van and the other man. They were 2 brothers-in-law. The man who owned the van, the driver who shouted for Yoon-hee to get into the car, had prior convictions for sexual assault. This put him on their radar as well. They never found anything else linking him to Yoon-hee after he had said goodbye to her that day. At this point, the case felt like it was written by Ryan Murphy. Just twist, and none of them seemed to connect, or even matter, but we didn't know which one was which. The police did end up interviewing Yoon-hee's neighbors about that evening, and all of them said they hadn't heard any noise from her apartment, they didn't hear anything strange in the hallways, and they even said that the walls of the apartment were paper thin, and they could hear if someone was playing music or even talking on the phone. That night, they didn't hear anything. So it's most likely that if she was attacked, it wasn't in the apartment. I wish I could say there are no more twists to this story in case, but there is another one, and it's a doozy. Now, they had to believe that there's a possibility that Yoon-hee's dead, so where would her body be? The police had visited the university to speak to her professors and classmates. This next discovery was made over the course of a few weeks after her disappearance as pieces of information were discovered, but I'm going to present it all together. At the veterinary school, they dissect animal cadavers as part of the program so that they can learn firsthand how to treat animals without the possibility of harming one. Very similar to medical school for human cadavers. The school dealt with all sorts of animals from domestic to exotic. Horses, pigs, cows, cats, dogs, birds, turtles, snakes, and I'm sure even some more exotic ones than that. On the day after Yoon-hee's disappearance, Wednesday, June 7th, the day that she didn't show up for class, she had a lab where they were dissecting an animal. I don't know the specifics of the class, but it was a small animal. That detail is important, and you'll learn later why. When the labs finished with the cadavers, if they couldn't be used again, they sealed the remains in a cadaver bag and sent it to the incinerator on campus. Those bags were weighed and logged, but not open, not inspected. They were just weighed for the specific procedures on how the incinerating happened. The employee at the incinerator doesn't need to open or inspect the bags because, to avoid being gross, the cadavers are used to their full extent of their usefulness. So it's just a lot of viscera. On that day in particular, a bag was logged in at 110 kilograms or 242 pounds. That's quite heavy and large, so perhaps it was a pig, goat, or like an aquatic animal like a shark. I'm not sure what they studied. Plenty of animals they studied were even heavier than this too. So the bag was incinerated like normal amongst the other cadavers being retired. Now, professors of the lab confirmed that they did not have any animals that size that were retired that week. If you're following the police's idea, Yoon-hee was about 45 to 55 kilograms, or 100 to 120 pounds at the time of her disappearance. If Yoon-hee was murdered, placed in a body bag with an animal's body, and sealed, nobody would have known. The incinerated remains were disposed of as usual. They don't save them. So by the time this suspicious information was learned, the remains were long gone. So who had access? Professors, students, and the employees at the incinerator. There is even the mention that her body could have been dismembered to not be as noticeable as the shape of a human body. For her sake and her family's sake, I hope this was not the ending that she received. The case continued to become more complex and disorganized. Various calls came in about the case, which is normal for police investigations. Fake leads often come in from attention-seeking or confused people, or, sometimes even useful information, but it's related to other cases. In particular, the police followed the lead of a psychic who had called saying that they had seen Yoon-hee's death and that her body was in an underground sewage tunnel. The investigative team did send officers to the sewers in the area and searched for hours, but ultimately they found nothing. It wasted their time. They were desperate for information to help them with the case. The evidence that they could have had was in the trash, cleaned away by family and friends who didn't know the harm to the investigation that they'd done. It wasn't their fault. The officers whose job it was to know hadn't done their job. I'll never not call out mistakes like this when they could have been easily prevented by someone just doing the bare minimum of their job. This happens in every career path, but the Korean police have been criticized by the public for a very long time for not serving or protecting the people. The family's trust was in the police, and they cost them the investigation. So this is when the investigation fizzled out. Less than a month from her disappearance. No information or traces of her were found. It was like she had walked out of the apartment into thin air. For 10 years, the case was dormant until it was reopened and investigated with fresh eyes in 2016. Thanks to the Taewani Act, which I covered in a previous episode, the case was able to be reopened, but unfortunately, no new information was found. The lead detective from 10 years prior was interviewed by journalists, and he said that he regretted that they only followed up on June as the main suspect. They never took any other leads seriously. Professor Moon, Salman, and even the man who helped her chase the motorcyclist were all ignored in the investigation. The detective even mentioned that after they discovered the problem with the suspicious cadaver, his gut told him that the professor was the most likely culprit. He had the most unsupervised access to the incinerators and cadaver bags. When the police interviewed him and got his statement, the time that he got home from the party kept changing from 2 to 2:30 multiple times. A minor detail, but his story was never consistent. The family, however, continued to believe that her killer was June, the unrequited love. Yoon-hee had always had some fear of him and complained about him being creepy or a pervert, even though she remained friends with him. Perhaps this is what she feared would happen if she left him. The case went cold, and Yoon-hee was never found. Her family has never stopped looking for her. I hope we can take away from this case that we should take stalking and harassment seriously. If you or someone you know is experiencing behavior like this from someone close to you or someone you don't know, please talk to somebody and get help. Thank you for listening to Korean True Crime. If you'd like to hear more, follow the show wherever you're listening from. Make sure to leave a review. It really helps me out. If you'd like to send feedback, you can find me on all social media sites at Korean True Crime. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.